because Space Quest 6 is complicated already. For those who don't know,
Oh yeah,
Neil Grandstaff had worked on several Sierra soundtracks around the 93 to 94 time, and Space Quest 6 was written in 94, released in 95. But a lot of the music from Space Quest 6 is actually unused music from other games that Neil worked on. So Police Quest 4, King's Quest 7, even some tracks from Larry 6 and others. The very short explanation is that Space Quest 6 has two soundtracks. One, what is in the final game in the order that is in the game, and two, what Neil Grandstaff actually intended. It's complicated because Space Quest 6 is such a composition of different Neil Grandstaff soundtracks and then original music on top of it. But a lot of Space Quest 6 music is repurposed either from other games that was used in other games or from other games that was rejected or unused from other games. So,
yeah.
Like, just as a random example, the Information Superhighway music is left over from first, Larry 6, and second, King's Quest 7, and it was unused in both.
Famously, the Polysorbate 60 music shows up in King's Quest 7 in a graveyard scene. Just
correct.
It's the
well, it was
same
actually
track.
composed. It was composed for that, and having talked to Neil on the phone when I lived in the States, he said him and Dan Keeler, who were kind of the bosses of the Sierra composing world at that point, because Mark Siebert had sort of started to produce games, as he did with Phantasmagoria.
Yeah.
Most famously, it was his first big sort of one. But yeah, they deliberately had set it up to reuse themes between games, to create a sort of, well, two things. One, to have nods to other games in a very deliberate sort of way, because, you know, young people are playing these games and young people appreciate that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, hearing musical cues that are shared. Kids love that stuff.
I do.
And I still love that stuff.
Yeah.
And the other reason they were doing it was to try to build a musical brand. Because General MIDI was so nondescript, especially if you weren't playing it on a Roland sound canvas. It sounded very generic, so it was more like generic MIDI than General MIDI, to use a really bad play on words there. So they wanted to create a sort of branding, and yeah, unfortunately, most people didn't realize it because it was done in a lot of games that weren't huge hits. At least now, it's hard to know what was big back in the day. I think Space Quest 6 sold fairly well, even though popularity-wise, it's kind of not looked on that favorably. But the games that shared music were a lot of sort of obscure games. So you have King's Quest 7, which you touched on, but there's also links with Space Quest 6 and Eco Quest 2,
Yes.
Larry 6,
Pepper's Adventures
in Time. It's 2 a.m. here, so my brain isn't firing on all cylinders. But, there are several other. Police Quest 4 has a link as well. So there's a lot of games, and a lot of them now. It's easy to look in hindsight and say, well, that strategy didn't work very well, because a lot of those games now are not considered in Sierra's upper echelon. But at the time, you know, they were the current releases.
Yeah, but also, I mean, who's going to buy Pepper's Adventures in Time and then Police Quest 4? They don't really fit.
A lot of them, and Larry 6 and Eco Quest 2, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Sort of, yeah, it's not really.
There's a questionable sort of cause and effect link between some of these games, but I think the goal was to do it in a whole bunch more games. Phantasmagoria, I don't think there's a link there, but Neil.
No, there isn't, because Mark Siebert personally took it upon himself to compose music for Phantasmagoria.
Except, I can tell you exclusively on the SQ6 channel for now that Neil Grandstaff composed the majority of music in Phantasmagoria.
Oh no, he did, didn't he?
He did, and I didn't actually know that.
No, me neither.
Until he told me, and I have his original files to prove it. But the majority of Mark Siebert's composition in the game was the digital songs.
Yeah, the
Gregorian chant.
Fortuna ripoff thing.
Correct.
Well, it kind of runs in the family, doesn't it? I mean, Phantasmagoria itself was not designed by Roberta Williams either, so screw it.
Well, yeah. Let's if we were to be honest, we would say that Phantasmagoria is almost an Inception level mashup of different people's ideas.
It almost strikes me, and this is not canon or anything, but the person who actually ended up designing Phantasmagoria was Andy Hoyos, who was a 3D artist who just built a fancy house, and my assumption is he built a fancy 3D house.
Andy Hoyos is an amazing artist, incidentally.
Oh yeah, he is. Someone looked at that house and went, "Can you make a story to come with that house?" And he went, "Yes." And they go, "That's the new Roberta Williams game." That's my headcanon.
I'm pretty sure a year later he was the exec producer on Phantas 2 as well. So he obviously did something right.
Oh yeah, but a lot of Roberta Williams games, especially, were like litmus tests for young and up and coming designers. We all know, King's Quest 6 was Jane Jensen's project, and King's Quest 7 was Lorelei Shannon's project.
Yeah. And Lorabo 2 had almost nothing to do with Roberta at all.
That was
written by Bruce Balfour and Josh Mandel.
Yes.
Dynamix people sort of operated in their own little bubble, as it were, and still do. A lot of them didn't have contact with Sierra people, and a lot of them still don't 20 years later, 25 years later. So, there's a sort of a click there.
Because they were their own bubble. They were a successful game company.
They were literally
before they got
that's
bought.
true. And I only sort of really appreciated that recently because I was talking to the writer of the other person that wrote on Rise of the Dragon, other than David Sell, who we touched on before, a guy called Jerry Luttrell. Very, very interesting and nice man. And yeah, I mean, a year before Rise of the Dragon, he was writing, a little known franchise called Die Hard, where they which was a Dynamix game first for anybody who cares. And yeah, he was telling me the other day that they got the movie stuff. They weren't allowed to use Bruce Willis's likeness, so they had to get one of their programmers to do the Bruce Willis scenes. They had to rewatch movie footage and see how they could emulate it. In DOS, fun times, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, Dynamix had like all the people they got to play the Die Hard people were all Dynamix employees.
It's amazing not only to be a Sierra fan with the sort of, I was going to say, baggage that we carry from the mid-90s.
Oh, there is baggage.
There's that too, yes. But just sort of the wealth of the early internet communities and onwards, and where
it's pretty amazing the stuff.
You could email people from Sierra and get responses back and stuff.
I think this for those who don't know what Trolls did for the Space Quest community, which was my first interaction in the Sierra community, but Trolls wrote this document called the SQ6, which was and is a great resource. I don't know how many kilobytes it is in a text file, but it is a lot of kilobytes, and it is big, and it probably consumed way too much of your life. But I mean, I consulted it for a long time. I still have it somewhere on my hard drive, and it basically was the Space Quest fans' Bible, because before internet search engines were any good, before Google was the thing that it is now, you had Alta Vista, you had other crummy search engines that may or may not have gotten you where you want. And finding a document like that, either a single web page or a resource like that, was so much more useful than searching like 20 Space Quest sites that said, I love Roger Wilco and had little gifts from the games, this was the real deal. So I can definitely pay a lot of respect to Trolls for the hard work you did.
Oh, thank you. I've never actually thought of it that way. I've never thought of it being, because this is pre-wiki, pre-search engine stuff.
It's easy to look through. It's easy to look 20 years back with today's knowledge, because the curse of knowledge means you know what you know. You can't unknow it.
I think it's super cringy to look at today, honestly. But I was 16 years old when I wrote the fucking thing.
Well, hey, I have a similar thing, because I was 17 years old when I recorded my first soundtrack for my website, which was Quest of Glory 4. And in a lot of ways, it's the soundtrack I'm most proud of. Fun fact, if you listen to some of Aubrey Hodge's real game versions from his Real Instrument soundtrack some of those are my recordings from when I was 17 years old. So you never know where your recordings will end up.
Wow. Hey, well, speaking of, this is actually a good segue into, so I've been doing the Space Quest vinyls, but a lot of a question I get often is, will you be doing Quest for Glory 4, for instance, which is a favorite of many?
That's a great segue. I love it.
King's Quest 5 or 6,
King's Quest 6.
Everyone loves the soundtrack to King's Quest 6. I've even gotten a request to do Police Quest 2. But that was from a person on my Discord who shall remain nameless.
That actually, to be fair to that nameless person, that kind of makes sense because Police Quest 2 has about 15 to 20, well, let's say 20, just to cover my butt, minutes of music. So it can fit on a vinyl side, or it can easily fit on one vinyl. Most vinyls that people are going to be ponying up for are going to be 4.
Depending on I have said that I will not do other Sierra adventure game reorchestration thingies because I'm into Space Quest, and honestly I'm not really that much into the other Sierra series. I played them,
and as we have also established tonight, you have a baby less than 12 months old.
There's that as well. It's a very tiny.
And as we all know, babies and time go hand in hand.
Yes, until they learn to walk, in which case they run hand in hand. So I am happy to turn the word over to my friend Mr. Gillett, who.
Well, let me preface this next conversation by saying, vinyls for me is going to be an experiment. A, I've never done it before, and B, I don't know if I'll get the same following that Trolls has had with his Space Quest sort of orientation and branding. So it's an experiment. I'm very much happy to try and make it happen. If I can do it at reasonable cost and we can make it work. But if it can't work, either because of cost or because of interest or because of any other factor, it will not happen. So, if you're interested, I've been posting a mailing list, which is just a Google form with a couple of questions on it, around a couple of Sierra groups like Sierra Gamers and Sierra Gaming World, as well as the Sierra Music Facebook group that I run and that Trolls is in. So please get on that if you're interested in all things Sierra music. Your first project,
you've gotten in touch with the original composer of said project and tentatively working on?
There's unfortunately there's been a little bit of stagnation with who has source material and who doesn't have source material. But what I can say is the first project at this point in time is a re-release of the Gabriel Knight 20th anniversary music that Robert Holmes recreated a few years back. Robert hated the MIDI format because he didn't like the computer side of it. He liked being able to play instruments. So a lot of the other Sierra guys were the ones that transcribed that soundtrack to MIDI. So Robert recreated it from ear. However, things have not been quite as simple as that, because Robert has since told me that he either doesn't have the master files or has misplaced them in one of the storage boxes that X-Sierra people, if anyone's ever talked to an X-Sierra person about resources, they will get the answer that Trolls and I have gotten, which is it's in a storage box in my shed or in a zip drive in my storage shed off-site.
Or was Sierra destroyed.
Or the more depressing version, it was destroyed or lost years ago. But we will not consider such options.
For surviving stuff, it's usually in a box that no one has looked at for over 30 years.
Or accessible, but in a format from the 90s that's obsolete and that they can't access.
Yes.
So there's lots of fun options. Either if that succeeds or if that doesn't come to pass at all, the first release then will become likely a King's Quest 6, which is just, probably the most popular Sierra game of all time. I will generally say, just because the King's Quest games had such
I can attest to that. It is by far the most requested soundtrack. Like, are you ever going to do anything other than Space Quest? How about King's Quest 6? That usually follows after that question.
I mean, the two most popular sort of Sierra games and soundtracks both are King's Quest 6 and Quest for Glory 4.
Yes.
So it would not surprise me if either of those games came up.
All the time. All the damn time.
I put on a poll on my Sierra Music Facebook group, and while King's Quest 6 led for a long time, Gabriel Knight 1 suddenly raced up the charts. And
Gabriel Knight fans do that. They tend to vote in the evening. I don't know if they're all vampires or something.
I think what it actually was someone, and I think it was your fellow Dane, Frederick Olsen.
Yeah, he did that.
Actually added it as a poll option because I hadn't locked off the poll options. And after he did that, suddenly Gabriel Knight polled extremely well. So I have him to thank for that. But
he's always a wild card, friend.
He's a good man. But no, it'll work out well because if it's something where I don't have to record a bunch of audio for that could work out well since I'm still in the infancy of my new setup.
What I'm doing is essentially taking the stuff that was in the released versions, like yanking stuff out of the game, whereas you have the luxury, I would say, of having the original composers send you their files. So they might be slightly different from what was in the finished product, but they are close to what the original composer intended.
So most of what I do, here's the thing, as you already alluded to, a lot of original Sierra files are lost or are in storage, and the people that own them or are sitting on them aren't willing to get them out for various reasons.
Because then Activision sues them. Hi, Al. Hello.
In most cases, they don't care about Activision, and it's just that they can't be bothered. But that's another story. But most of what I deal with is the same as you, extracted from the game. It's only in about, let's say, 20% of cases where I'm lucky enough to have the original soundtrack data. Basically, I have hassled a lot of people over a lot of years, and as time goes on, you get more contacts, and the luxury of Facebook, as we've sort of touched on, is contacting somebody is as simple as messaging them and saying hi. Whereas before with an email, how easy is an email to ignore? Or for it to go into the wrong inbox and things like that. Yes. Whereas with messaging, people see the message, and it becomes incredibly obvious if they ignore it or not.
Yeah.
Although I do have a fun Space Quest, this is a 5-second aside. The Sierra voice actor, Carol Bach Rita, however you pronounce that.
Yes. Sharpay and Stella
also
Santiago.
Stella and a million other voices, both in that game and King's Quest 7 and others. So she never replied to a message of mine, and I just thought, okay, got ignored. And then 2 years later, she replies and says, "I'm so sorry I never replied to your message. It just got lost in the sea of time," or whatever. I don't quite remember what she said, but it was something like that. And then she just gave this really nice reply. So never say never. Never say never. Space Quest 6, you and I should actually have a Space Quest 6 chat sometime, because of the amount of stuff I've found out about that. And just on the audio side, which I touched on earlier and meant to tease, but didn't even get to that. We could talk for 2 or 3 hours just about that.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's so complicated.
Anyway, let's
I will give a tease before I break and say that, for example, Festa Blatz has a theme. Festa Blatz's theme in Space Quest 6 was supposed to be the music that plays in the hideout.
Oh, the apartment thing. The apartment music.
Yeah, in the Nigel and St. John's.
They are very similar. They are very similar. The two pieces of music.
I would say they have similarities, but are not similar. But
they're not
either way,
like tonally, but they're still like synth.
Yeah,
pieces.
tonally. Yeah, no, I'll cop that.
And Neil also told me that he did score the entire game, and then halfway or not, like close to the end of the project, he jumped ship and went to work at Dynamix. And
very similar to Josh Mandel. Except Josh quit the company and Neil just moved to a different part of it, but. Because Neil actually completed it. He didn't, unlike Josh, who left before the game was done, for reasons we'll get into another day. Neil completed his work, the 2 hours of music, and then went off to his next thing, which happened to be at Dynamix. And then the programmers who were sort of not happy about the whole game development scenario, possibly deliberately, possibly innocently, put the music through the game at half correct and half incorrect points.
Yeah, and now there was apparently some middle management meddling that also involved making Dan Keeler go into the project and recompose some music, which ended up not being used at all. That's why there's a bunch of unused music in the resource files as well. There's enough music. There's enough unused music in the resource files to fill the site of vinyl. I'll just say that.
You should see what I've just gotten recently, which is the amount of unused music in Neil's resources on top of that are not in the game resources.
Yeah, see, that's the thing I should really talk to you about, because the Space Quest 6 record is already a double vinyl, and it's squeezing the max out of the sides available.
It'd need to be a separate thing, like, because Space Quest 6 is really, it's really two sort of games. I mean, you already have the two halves of the game, which are so different. And then the development, you have Josh Mandel and the Neil Grandstaff part, because those two worked closely together on the vision of the music. Josh didn't have anything to do with the audio, but Neil respected Josh a hell of a lot as a visionary and a writer. And then those guys were gone, and different things happened to both the story and the music. But yeah, I mean, the problem for Dan Keeler, and he was an audio director at Sierra. He sort of took over from Mark Siebert when Mark Siebert became a producer. He was left with the unenviable task of sort of guessing where everything belonged, and then that would have just been awful. But yeah,
let's have a break and let's talk about books.
Like digital soundtracks that I have that nobody else has, like knowledge that I have that nobody else has, things that I have or am privy to that others don't. Even if it's just a temporary version, I'm going to put some soundtracks like Rama, for example, to give an example of something I have the master files for, on the side, and